what she was facing. So I'll let Jenny tell you her story. She's a sweet gal. And I just want to say Jenny brought a special friend in her life, and that's Michelle. And Michelle is Jenny's goddaughter. She came to know her mother while she was going to the University of Miami. It's a neat story.
I will clarify at the beginning, I'm not a really old-looking 24-year-old. I graduated in 2010 with my PhD, so.
Oh, excuse me, thank you.
So I don't look really old, I'm 32. So for me, probably like, I know there's some cancer survivors in the room, and so for probably many of you, when you hear the words, "you have cancer," it knocked me off my feet. I didn't see it coming. I thought, I'm really healthy. I'm a former athlete. I'm really fit. I don't feel sick at all. And I get a call from the doctor saying, I'm really sorry, but you have thyroid cancer. So I was in Missouri at the time, and I wasn't even the one that discovered it. I had gone home for Canadian Thanksgiving, and I was sitting across the table from my father at a big family dinner, and he looked at me and he said, "What is on your neck?" I'm thinking I spilled food on myself. And he pointed out a lump on my neck that after seeing it, I thought, how did I not see this on my own? So I immediately went to a doctor in Canada, went back to Missouri, saw several doctors, ended up getting a biopsy, and 2 days later got the phone call that said, "I'm sorry, you have cancer, we need to take it out." So very quickly after that, I had surgery, came out of surgery, and the surgeon was there saying, the surgery went fantastic. We got the cancer out. It had spread to lymph nodes as well as to your thymus, so we took everything out. It was great. But having come to after surgery, I knew very quickly everything was not okay. I had no voice at all. I was having trouble swallowing, and I was having trouble breathing. And putting those three things together, the doctor knew right away something happened to the vocal cords. And with a thyroidectomy, your thyroid sits right next to the two nerves of your vocal cords. And it happens to less than 1% of the people who get a thyroidectomy. Both of my vocal cord nerves were damaged. So what happened was your vocal cords work like this. They open to breathe, they close and vibrate to speak, and they close to swallow so that it goes, what you're eating or drinking goes down your esophagus instead of into your airway and your lungs. And what happened to me was that my vocal cords were paralyzed partly, so they weren't able to close. So I was choking when I was swallowing anything, even a little sip of water. I had no voice because they weren't able to make contact. And I was having trouble breathing because they were only partially open. So here I was a professor, thinking in my head, okay, I have this, I was healthy all my life, so I have this big struggle now, I have the trial of cancer. Okay, so I'll go in, I'll get surgery, follow up with treatment, I'm gonna be out of the hospital, I'm gonna recover, back to teaching, back to working out like I always did. And cancer was the obstacle to overcome. And all of a sudden, the cancer was an aside. Yes, the surgery got rid of the cancer, but I can't walk up one flight of stairs without stopping and having to catch my breath. I had no voice, and I'm a professor. I have been a lifelong athlete, and I can't breathe. And so that was, for me, I think, looking back on that first struggle, it was the biggest thing for me to overcome was not the cancer, it was this sense of loss that who I was and how I saw myself was no longer how I was today. So I was really just struggling with that, and I had this lens that I saw my life, and happy and life goes on and I recover, but I was so absorbed with these limitations that I now had. Even, I don't know if you all can tell, but I struggle when I talk because it's hard to talk and breathe out of a narrow airway. So even now as a professor, it's always hard for me to speak, and that's a really big part of my job. And even working out now, it's a huge modification of what I can and can't do. And working out daily and talking all the time, I had constantly in front of me this huge, in my eyes, thing that I lost. And it took me, so I was in Missouri. In 2012, I came back to Miami. I was blessed with a position here at UM. And I came back, and got into an appointment with this amazing doctor who was a specialist in vocal cords, so that was his specific area. And I went in to see him, and I went through this list of everything I was struggling with and what was the problem. And he was very sympathetic, but said really quickly, "You know how it works with vocal cord paralysis, right?" And he told me this, that vocal cords, when they're paralyzed, can be paralyzed in any position, and it's completely random. It's not impacted by anything but chance. Your vocal cords, when they're paralyzed, could be paralyzed completely open, could be paralyzed completely closed, or somewhere in the middle. The fact that mine were paralyzed somewhere in the middle meant I still had enough of an airway to breathe on my own. If they were paralyzed completely closed, you need a tracheotomy, and for the rest of my life, I would be breathing out of a hole in my throat. I had my left vocal cord is fully paralyzed, my right is partially. So I have some movement, not enough to close it, but with a scope, he was able to see a muscle outside of the vocal cord compensate and push it over enough that I'm able to speak, and I have not an amazing voice, but enough of a voice that I can communicate. So I'm able to breathe, I'm able to speak completely on my own, no trach, no feeding tube if it were completely paralyzed open. And he said that to me, and I sat in his office, and it was like a complete perspective shift, because this year and a half I've been thinking about, I lost this, I can't do this, I used to be so healthy, and suddenly it was like, Jenny, you have so much and you're so blessed. And I don't think it prevents me from having some time of grief for what I lost, but I am so blessed and able to do so much, and what it's become is a modification of how I live, not that I'm no longer able to participate in life wholly. And even the fact that I was with this doctor was, as my mom likes to call it, a God thing, that came from something incredibly embarrassing. So over time, I got better as my body learned to compensate. It took about 4 months for my voice to come back following surgery. So all my courses were very quickly shifted to be online. The swallowing I got better at, but still occasionally I would struggle. And the breathing was the same. There was nothing that got better with breathing. So I got the position in Miami in 2012, and not long after that, I went to a dinner party with my boyfriend and friends of friends. So it was a big table, and I knew no one except my boyfriend. So we're sitting around the table, and we had eaten, and I'm taking a drink of some tea, and of course I have the swallowing issue. And so at this table of a bunch of people I don't know, I swallow, my vocal cords don't close, so it goes down wrong, so I cough, and when that happens, sometimes they spasm, so they lock up. So it goes down wrong, I cough, they spasm and lock up. So I'm sitting at this table with a bunch of strangers going, and in my head I know this is gonna pass. It always, at some point, the vocal cords relax and I can breathe again, but in the moment, all my body wants is air, and everyone around the table is panicking. My boyfriend had never seen it happen before, so he's freaking out. The host doesn't know what's going on. So it's a little bit crazy. I get my breathing back, and I'm sitting at a table of silence with everyone just like staring at me. And it was so embarrassing. So I was like, so here's my story. So I went through and explained the background of why this happened, what was going on. And the host looked at me and said, I had thyroid cancer. I had an incredible surgeon, and you're going to see him this week. Here's his number. Make sure you set an appointment. So I went to his office that week, and he looked at my situation. He did the scope. They take like a camera up your nose and down your throat, and it's horrible. And they look at the movement of your vocal cords. And he said, I have about 20% of the airway of a normal person, and I need to see an expert. And it just so happened that he was in communication with someone who just finished his fellowship with a top otolaryngologist in the world, who is out of Harvard, and he's coming down here in 2 weeks to look at whether or not he'd want to come down and open a practice down here. So he said, I'm getting you an appointment, you're going to be the first person in, come back in 2 weeks. So I came back, and that was the doctor who said, after I gave him my list of complaints, you know that you're really lucky, right? So that doctor not only became my primary, I saw him every 3 months with checkups and then any emergencies that came up, but in that same appointment, he went down a list of things that I could do preventatively to make sure that nothing happened. For the first time it had been almost 2 years since my surgery, I was told things can go from completely fine to a real life-threatening emergency in minutes. Because my airway is so narrow, he said I needed a medical alert bracelet on at all times, and I always need to carry a pack of steroid pills so that if I have a cough or if I have a reaction to something, any inflammation, because my airway is so narrow, any inflammation can close it really quickly. So he gave me some precautions, and I left just feeling like, oh, okay, this is really good information to know. I wish I had known that. Well, probably less than 4 months after that, my boyfriend and I had gone to LA for a trip, and in coming back home, I was flying to Miami and he was flying back to Charlotte, so I was on my own. And our final day there, we were hanging out and I had a little cough, but felt completely fine. Coughing here, coughing there. And he said, you know, you should probably take your pills. The doctor said if you have a cough, take your pills. And I thought, I feel fine, my throat, I don't have any breathing issue, I think it's fine. And my boyfriend is hard-headed, and so he said, just take your pills. You said take them, okay, fine. Took my pills, went on with the day. We were both flying on the red eyes, so we went our separate ways. I got on the plane, coughed, had my water, but felt fine. About halfway through the flight, I lost my voice completely. So the flight attendant's coming by for drinks, and I went to talk to her, and no sound came out. My voice was gone. The lights go down, everyone falls asleep. And about an hour and a half from Miami, I noticed I'm really struggling to breathe. And I'm sitting there, and it was like, and I'm doing nothing. I'm just sitting in my chair, everyone's asleep, and I'm not gonna get emotional. I've never felt so alone. And I'm looking out. And everyone's asleep, and I can't breathe. And so I just sat there and I was like, okay, God, I don't know what to do. Please just keep my airway open and we'll figure it out when we land. So I'm looking out, looking at the tops of the clouds. I'm like, okay, God, this is on you. I'm just gonna try to stay calm. So I made it to Miami. It was an hour and a half, the longest of my life, I think, sitting there just like, I've never been so focused on breathing. And you don't think about it, but losing the ability to breathe and it being out of your control is the most terrifying experience I've ever had. So we landed, they called an ambulance. I was okay. I was able to go see my doctor later that morning. He did the scope and he said, your airway is 3 millimeters. And it was still, even in his office, I was struggling. And he said, had you not taken those steroid pills, they would have had to do an emergency landing. Your throat would have closed. They would have had to do an emergency of landing, and you wouldn't have made it. And I was, I think, 29 at the time. Healthy all my life. Never thought of death or anything in any way. I don't know that I walked through my life invincible, but it just hadn't really been anything that I was thinking about. And so, looking back, this embarrassing moment where I choke at a dinner party led to this doctor who brought down the specialist, who gave me the steroid pills, who 4 months later saved my life. And as amazing as that was, I wish I could say that that gave me the confidence moving forward that God's got his hand on my life and I'm fine. But more so than that, I think it gave me a lot of anxiety, because suddenly, to be in an experience where you can't really breathe, I would be driving down the road or at the gym trying to work out, or getting on a plane again after that first experience. And I had this constant running of my head of, can I breathe? Am I okay? Does it feel tighter? Do I need to take my pills? Should I go to the hospital? And it was so much anxiety and so much fear from this one experience, even though I knew I could step back and in my head say, I can see God's hand all over this. In those moments, all I could think about was, I know what it feels like not to be able to breathe, and I'm so scared to go back there. So, I don't even know how long I was dealing with, and it wasn't something really that I talked about, but it was just an internal panic that would come and go, all focused on my breathing. And it wasn't until, I don't know how long ago, and one of my Bible study girls is here, and I had told them this story not too long ago. I was sitting in my car and I was listening to 90.9, which is the Christian radio station. And they had a preacher on, and I can't even remember what he was talking about, but he had this one sentence, and he said, if it's God's time to take you home, no level of health that you have, no physician, no modern medicine is going to keep you here. But if it's not his time for you, no illness, no disease, no tragedy can take you. And I heard that and I was just like, oh, like I don't have to have this fear that, is it now? What do I do? Like, what if something happens? What if it gets locked up again? And it doesn't take away the concern, but it takes that anxiety of, what about now? What if this happens? What if I don't do the right thing? So I can be cautious and make good decisions, but have some peace about the fact that it's not on me. It's not in my control to save or make the right decision or make sure, prevent this. I need to be smart and let the Lord do his work in my life. So I wish that that's where my story ended and then happy ending, everything's behind me. But unfortunately, this past January, I went through my routine CAT scan, blood work, ultrasound, etc. And there were indications that the cancer was back. So not only was I looking at cancer again, but all of the complications that come with my new medical condition with my breathing. So, am I okay to keep going? So I, through my doctor, the one who gave me the pills and everything, I went in with him when the results came back and he said, you need to have surgery. I had had treatment previously in addition to surgery, and it, some tests to do that showed that it wasn't effective. The cancer was no longer responsive to that treatment, and so surgery was my only option. And so I sat with my doctor and we talked about that kind of stuff, and he said, if you need surgery, there's one doctor in Miami that I would recommend to you. I would send my mother to him. He's incredible. He has the best hands I've seen in the operating room. And I said, sold, I'll go to him. So he got me an appointment very quickly. I met with this doctor and just felt so confident in who he was and his ability, and really just feeling like God's hands were all over this. I went in to meet with him. We talked about my whole situation, and he said, interesting that you came at this time, because in 2 days I have an international convention with thyroid cancer surgeons. So I'm going to take all of your medical records in 2 days, present it to the conference. We'll go through everything, and then I have all of these experts to talk with. Let's meet in a week and a half and we'll talk again. And I thought, gosh, the timing of that is pretty incredible. So over time, we decided on a plan. The big risk was that if I needed an extensive surgery, and in order to go under, you need a breathing tube. Well, for me, I have such a narrow airway that a breathing tube going down it always causes irritation. So any inflammation, then when they take it out, he said would likely close the airway. In addition to the fact that any irritation may cause permanent damage, which I just can't afford any more damage to my vocal cords. So we talked about a bunch of different options of, is there any way to get around this to preserve the vocal cord? Because the outcome is the permanent trach. So he met with the doctors. We even talked about doing it under local anesthesia, where he would be operating on my neck and be moving my trachea, and I would be awake for it. So that was on the table for not that long because I was like, no, I can do it. And then I thought of it, I was like, I can't do that one. So he came back from the conference and said, we have a plan, I want to talk to you about it. And the plan was, instead of doing the surgery, hoping for no trach, and what would happen was they would take it out and I would have to do my best to be calm, and if I couldn't breathe, they would do an emergency tracheotomy. What they proposed was to do a voluntary tracheotomy, open me up, insert the breathing tube through the hole, and then my airway would be untouched. And that's what we did. So I had a tracheotomy the middle of May. They got the breathing tube in, put me down, I think it was a 5-hour surgery. They were able to do an almost full neck dissection. So I have a lovely reminder from ear to ear. But they removed 80 lymph nodes. And from the shoulders up to the back of my ears, down a little bit into my chest. I had a trach in for a week. And he said, everything we're going to do is to try to set you up so that trach gets removed, but it's not a guarantee. So understand that when you go into this, there is a possibility that you're going to have a trach the rest of your life. And that was a lot to say, okay, doc, yeah, let's move forward. But it was the best option for my circumstance. And it was a lot of prayer, but that was the route that we went. And his care for me, knowing that I have a job where I teach, knowing that I'm 32 and still active and hoping for many things in my life, he was so considerate of the amount of time he took to complete my stitches, because I'm a little bit vain and I wanted to look nice on my neck. They used the smallest trach possible when they did the surgery. So they used the size of a trach that they use on little kids so that my hole was as small as possible. The day after surgery, they switched it out for an even smaller one, so that I would transition, so that everything was moving me toward being able to breathe on my own without the trach. And a week later, I went in on a Tuesday, and it was the day I was supposed to get my trach out, and I was sitting there with my parents, and the doctor messed with my throat, and I was like, okay, at some point he's gonna take the trach out. And I looked over at my dad, and my dad was like that. My mom's very nicely like, and my dad's like, I was like, okay, so the trach is out. But everything went smoothly. It was a long recovery, but everything healed properly. The surgery was incredibly successful. I had my 3-month post-checkup in August, and for the first time since I was diagnosed in 2011, the levels for the indicators of the presence of thyroid cancer were undetectable. And so it was amazing. It was the best day. I was out at happy hour and I got the call. And I was crying at happy hour, like, I'm looking crazy, but I'm so happy. So Arlene asked me to do this, and I said, oh, sure, it sounds great. And then I called Allison after, and I was like, I don't think I should have done this, because I feel, in these sorts of things, it feels like it should be someone who has cancer in their past and all of this insight and perspective in what they went through, and I feel very much in the midst of this storm. And blessed to say up here, I am at the undetectable level right now, but I don't know what's gonna come. So I have my full battery of tests for the 6-month point in January. But with what I've learned, I do know that God's hand is still there, and I'm hoping for cancer-free, but I know that if that's not the way it goes too, that I will be okay. Because if God's plan is for me to be here, none of that is going to take me. So that's my story. Thank you.
Jenny.